All right, Q&A. First Q&A question. How do you go about getting yourself on track to a C-suite position? Do you crush middle management? Do you crush sales? What's the most effective route? Okay, this is a good question. Let's be honest. There are probably 4 C-suite jobs in any company, right? So you've got your CFO, you've got your CRO or your salesperson, you've got a CPO, which is your chief people officer. You obviously have a CEO. Sometimes there's like chief commercial officer or chief digital officer. So essentially the group is very, very small. So most people, I think, will not end up in one of those jobs. That doesn't mean that you can't be in a job that has crazy influence in a company, right? Like I worked for Microsoft and Yahoo, and if you were a senior vice president at Microsoft or Yahoo, you ran, thousands and thousands of people and had a very, very powerful job. So I think this question is about like, how do you rise up in your career and how do you get to the top of the heap in terms of the company you're either working at or the sector you want to work in? I generally tend to think that there's a couple paths. So one path is revenue. Salespeople, you bring in the money. The people who bring in money at a company are very powerful in that company. It's hard to bring in money. It's the hardest job. It's also the most valuable job, or in some cases, the most valuable job. And it is a very specific job. Those people tend to know the story of the company. They know the customers of the company. They obviously know the revenue of the company. They're very critical to understanding how to help the company have revenue growth. Most companies' growth is defined by how much revenue they make. So the sales is one good way to move up the ranks. The second way, which I think is one of the most interesting ways, is to understand product. So you understand the product that company makes. So you either understand, if you're making washing machine widgets, you understand how to make the best washing machine widget. If you are in a social media company, you understand the algorithm, right? You're the Mark Zuckerberg. You're the Jack Dorsey, right? You came up through product or engineering. So the second path is really the product people, or people who understand how the product is made, what the product should be, what the customer ultimately wants, and how to deliver it to them. Those people and that path is a great way to move into the C-suite. And then I think the third path is on the finance side, right? You understand how the business is engineered. You understand how the money flows in and how the money flows out. When you look at Peloton right now, they had a founder CEO. Now they brought in a CFO CEO. So the path to CEO in that case was from someone who moved up the ranks in finance. So long story short, I think if you want to end up at the top of the heap, no matter what company you're in, what sector you work for, or what job you have, the 3 best paths to get there are sales, product, or finance, right? You work in recruiting, you tend to not end up running a company. Now, if you're the single fucking best recruiter out there, you could end up as the chief people officer. That makes sense. So it kind of gets to another answer to this question is the more responsibility you can take on, the more holistic view you have of your company and what you're trying to accomplish and how it can best be accomplished. I think those people, kind of to my earlier rant about Barstool, it's those people who are going to end up in charge. Second question, what's your advice on defining your role at a young company when you're forced to wear a lot of hats? That's a great question. I think one of the greatest things about a startup is you do get to wear a ton of hats, and any hour in any given day, you have a different job and you have a different outlook and you have a different mission and you have a different task at hand. Sometimes you can get lost in that, where you're just doing a random bunch of projects and it never amounts to anything. You don't end up in a better place. It's hard to think about what would your job be if you didn't work at this company. Sometimes I feel like that for people here, where at least I did more so in our early days. So in 2016, 2017, I would say to Gaz, like, Gaz, what's the job you would get if you didn't work at Barstool? Like, how would you frame what you do here to be able to equip you for what you could do out there, right? In those days, Gaz was like, I'm Dave's guy. I film the pizza reviews. I do a little of this. I do the social. I do a little of that. I think the best way to think about what you do is to really hone it down to what are the single biggest things that you contribute to that help move the company forward? What are the single biggest things that you enjoy doing the most and that you're the best at? And to use an external frame of reference when defining what that thing is, right? Everyone can take on side projects or special projects or a little bit of extra this or miscellaneous that. That's life. I think that's what keeps a job interesting, to be honest with you. But when you're thinking about defining what you do, I would really look at what is it you're good at, what is it the company values, and then also be sure you're looking outside to understand what the comparable would be. What would this job look like somewhere else? And use that as your job description. I would avoid a catch-all job description like chief of staff, tough job description. Special projects, kiss of death. So don't have a special projects job title, have a real job title. Even if your job is a hodgepodge of a lot of things, pick one of them to make your job title or your job, your role description, and then I think ultimately find a way to put more of your time and energy into doing those type of projects. All right, third Q&A is advice on dealing with a hyper micromanager. Oof, that sounds like a nightmare. Being newer to a company and wanting to make good impressions, but also wanting the environment to work for me too. Of course you want your work environment to work for you. Being managed by a hyper micromanager sounds like a fucking disaster. So I would not like that. I had a micromanager once. I thought she was like a fucking idiot. Like I could not stand working for this woman. She was a micromanager and she wasn't smart. And I just was like, you are the worst. So anyways, how do you deal with a micromanager? One is you got to box out. You got to don't have sharp elbows, but have elbows. You got to make space for yourself. So I would proactively communicate early and often, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. I would also be very forthright, which is, hey, my work style is this. I like to work independently, use words like independently. I'll check in when I need help. Could we move all of our check-ins to a once a week one-on-one versus a 5 times a day Slack or text or email check-in? So I would really just try to box out a little bit, and I would also try to understand what is it about that person that's causing them to micromanage? Do they want a lot of control? Are they worried about the quality of your work product? Are they just super anal and nervous and just a ticked and tied person? Try to understand what the motivation is and try to give yourself enough space in that to be able to thrive at work. I think being micromanaged is probably the quickest way to quit a job because it's just not fun and maybe your manager needs some help. The other thing you could do is if your company has an HR department, just say, hey, my work style and my manager's work style aren't really simpatico, right? Like they don't go together great. What are your pieces of advice? I'm not an HR person, even though I do run HR at this company now. They might have better advice on how you manage that, and they might be able to help your manager as well.